The town of Coraki starts off respectfully with an indigenous name of Coraki. The first ethnic European people into the junction of the river arms, North and South Arm, were two brothers of Ritchies who were involved with the maritime trade and established an inn in Coraki called the Ship Inn. From about 1849-50, the Yabsley family ventured into the Richmond Valley and decided upon buying into the area known as the Junction. Yabsleys established a timber trade and shipbuilding trade, and not long after Yabsleys established their trade in the early 1860s, the Yeager family, mainly in the guise of William Tudor Yeager, established a general store, and introduced the first steam vessel, the Keystone, a rear-wheel paddle steamer, to the Richmond Valley, and it became a floating store. One of the first streets in Coraki to develop was the Richmond Terrace on both sides of the river. The government wharf was built, there was a livestock wharf and a coal wharf, and from about the late 1870s, 1880s, maritime trade developed in the port of Coraki. Mobbs Bay, port of Coraki and Gundarimba were the first and main port areas of the Richmond Valley. Thus Coraki's nickname called the Hub. Coraki's maritime history revolves around a company that was known as the North Coast Steam Navigation Company, and its inception was from the Clarence River, and it started out its company life as the Grafton Steam Navigation Company and went through various changes and mergers to become the company of the North Coast Steam Navigation Company. The office of the North Coast Steam Navigation Company was in Richmond Terrace at Coraki, and it was situated at the government wharf in Coraki for many years. And that's the fact that gave Coraki its significance within the Richmond Valley as a maritime port, a shipping centre, in the respect that both the Yabsley family and Yeager family were producing ships. Yabsleys in the early days of barks, these sail-powered vessels. They had a short time venture into steam power of vessels, but I think eventually that technology went into sawmills. The timber industry was closely associated with the very means of transport and the medium for Coraki becoming a port or maritime town. There were two main timber varieties. Cedar was required as an interior timber of high aesthetic value. It replaced the mahogany, which was quite a dense, hard timber. And then once again, remembering that cedar is a softwood and it was easy to mill. The other timber that was the predominant timber industry of that era, from the 1850s, 40s and 60s, was the Arakara pine, or locally known as hoop pine. That tree was the only tree in the area to successfully split into roofing and building shingles. It also was easier to mill than hardwoods. The pine gave it certain preservative qualities in the water, and once the vessel was covered in copper, there was no problem using pine as the planking and as the hulls of ships. Prior to the dairying industry and to industry developing, the hoop pine was readily available for early housing, as well as very adaptable to packaging. The timber was versatile and grew abundantly throughout the Richmond River region. The early pioneers who were coming in for cedar predominantly claimed creeks north of Lismore, mainly north of Lismore, in the respect that these creeks were new stage rivers, and they had very steep banks and thus flowed through steep gullies or valleys. Those steep gullies and valleys encouraged the cedar tree to grow very tall and compete for sunlight. The timber was usually felled and pushed towards the edge of the creeks, or bull-winched to the edge of the creeks, stamped and left for a flood to carry them out. When they got to the river, they'd be caught at junction points, and Coraki had 2 koi warps stretched across the north and south arms to retrieve the timber that was floated downriver either by raft or by free floating itself in flooded times. So the flooding of the Richmond River was utilised in moving the timber to areas where it could be milled and eventually processed and loaded onto the shipping and transported to its various areas that were requiring that product. The major mills for the Mid Richmond were at Coraki by the Yabsley family, and then by the Ager family at Oaklands. The Woodburn area also has a tradition of timber milling, and the name of Woodburn has been accepted that it was chosen because of the amount of scrap wood that was burnt after milling, and the pall of smoke was a navigation marker for shipping. For Coraki, as I'd mentioned, we had 2 processing sawmills, so therefore that required a fairly large degree of shipping to move that produce out. The timber industry was also competing against the emergence of the dairying industry. The last known vessel commercially to ply the Richmond River was the Sunshine 2, and that was a cream boat that supplied cream in cans to Norco in Lismore. And I think it was in the early 1970s it was decommissioned, and that was the last of river transport. At about the same time, the Broadwater Sugar Mill was preparing to end its river transport of sugarcane and progress to road transport, which is the means of transport they have today. I still think it's a shame that the river's underutilised, by the way, as a transport medium.